And welcome back to Tankfest Thoughts. This is the second video, just random tidbits that I have put together from my visit to Tankfest at the Tank Museum Bovington 2018. And the first vehicle we have rolling around here is the CVRT, Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tracked, as opposed to the wheeled one, which is basically a Fox. A nippy little guy, I've always thought it was a very useful little vehicle. And one of the inconvenient parts about driving this thing is that the turning circle depends very much on what gear you are in, and it was always a very common mistake with new drivers, especially on the open road, that they would turn a little bit too tightly and into oncoming traffic simply because they were in the wrong gear. There were a number of battles.
Here's a fun one, the Matilda Cdl, a vehicle so secret and nobody dared use it. There were actually Lee versions of it as well, based off of the M3, and developed in the US was an M4 variant, although to my knowledge that never actually saw service in Europe. Of course, seeing service in Europe is a rather questionable statement anyway, given that, as I said, it was so secret they didn't want to use it. The idea behind it was that there was a light in that little slit that would flash rapidly and very, very brightly. It would disorient and blind people on the receiving end. In the end result, what they ended up doing was simply using it to illuminate the far side during the Rhine crossing, so, you know, whoop-dee. But as I said, they built a couple of regiments of these things, both American and British, and neither would use without the other's permission, because by then the surprise would be over. So there you go. In the end, it was just too much of a waste of equipment, personnel, time, and everything else. So they simply started converting these units back to gun tanks or whatever else they needed.
Now this is a rare one. It is a D model Sturmgeschütz 3, and to my knowledge it's only one of 4 that survive and the only one that runs. There are quite a few Sturmgeschütz 3s still around, mainly Finnish ones, and you'll note that the vast majority of them are G models with the commander's cupola. Of course, this early one, no cupola. They are setting up in their defensive position against the evil allies who will be attacking them. Of course, the Panzer III, you haven't seen it yet, but I have filmed it, and we'll see how that comes out in the inside hatch at a future date. I do note that they have used a politically correct German flag.
I do at some point want to come back and do Covenanter. It is infamous for being a terrible tank, and in fact it probably was. Although, in fairness, there have been recent books out indicating that perhaps they fixed most of the problems with the tank, in which case perhaps it is probably closer to be said as like Cromwell, also a terrible tank, which they fixed. The difference being that by the time Covenanter was fixed, it was time to move on to a new tank. By the time Cromwell was fixed, it was time to invade Europe. A little tidbit about the tank, apparently the pedals are in a very strange sequence of clutch, accelerator and brake. Nobody's been able to tell me why. A couple of American vehicles here from the Cold War. On the left, an M60A1. Now, if you're curious how to tell the difference between an M60A1 and an M60A3, easiest thing is look at the gun tube. If it's got a thermal shroud, i.e. if the barrel is thicker than the muzzle cap, you've got yourself an A3. This is an A1, it doesn't have the thermal shroud. Other giveaways, well, look at the blisters for the coincidence rangefinder on the right hand side. There may be a housing for the laser on an upgraded A3, and also the shape of the gunner's primary sight housing, aka the dog house. That is usually a little bit different as well. The M103 to its right, I've already covered it with the video, nice long one with Ken Estes, who used to actually crew the thing, so you got a great perspective there. Something that was just asked of me around the corner here, so maybe I didn't mention it before. The Army's M103s were not actually the Army's. They were merely on lease from the Marine Corps for a while. Once the Army decided they didn't need them anymore, they gave them back to the Marines, and that was the end of it.
Now, I haven't investigated as to why, but at Tankfest, both the M60 and the M103 are traditionally crewed by Austrians. The M60 you can understand, they used to have some, but the M103 throws me.
There are a couple of vehicles on the director's hit list for vehicles that he wants to acquire for the museum. If you happen to have lying around your backyard an M1 Abrams or a Merkava, he'll be very happy to talk with you. The ISs are another one on this list. Tankfest, this year we have a special treat. The lads at the Bastogne Museum in Belgium have decided to bring their IS-3 over. So it's a very nice surprise, and we'll be very happy to see this guy running around later, I hope.
After that, we'll have a short break whilst we reset for the battle. And we're actually this afternoon going to have 3 small little different battles to show the history of armour right from the First World War. We're going to have a Second World War battle and then a Gulf War I battle.
Note that the T-72, which is Polish marked, comes with the fish gill armour on the side. It's very old, but the idea is it sort of pre-detonates the incoming rounds from the front.
Because, to put it bluntly, the best bit of the day is the end of the afternoon. We have a stunning lineup of tanks for you from carousel at the end.
There is, of course, a bit of a pause as the World War I vehicles make their way around the arena. If you think about it, that's how fast you'd be crossing the battlefield, and all of a sudden you start becoming a very good target for artillery pieces.
Now, for those of you who don't know the Wheels Foundation, they have a reputation for incredibly exacting restorations. Basically, if they have finished a restoration on something, it is as close to the original as anything you will find anywhere else on the planet. Last year they came along with the Egg Panther. This year, 2 FTs. One being a traditional gun tank and the other one, this one right behind me, being a command tank. They are the best FTs anywhere in existence today. Now, they don't run them very far, just out into the middle of the field, because frankly it takes them forever to get anywhere. But hey, that's what you get with a 100-year-old tank. It wasn't as if they were speed demons.
And there are some of our Austrians again. The Austrian War Museum is in Vienna. It's a beautiful converted arsenal building made of brick. And they do have an annual event every year where they bring vehicles out, but they don't have much way of running space. So all you can do with vehicles really is just look at them in the parking lot or in the little vehicle collection they have out back of the yard.
Now, I'm not going to talk about this vehicle. You can look it up yourself. What I am going to talk about is where this vehicle is from. No, not Germany. Fort Lee, Virginia. Backstory. There used to be a nice big armor collection at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where a lot of the American vehicles were tested and a lot of captured vehicles were evaluated. They were basically stored out in the open, rusting away in the Atlantic area, and it was a terrible thing. Some of the vehicles were given a restoration of sorts, such as this guy here. Now, those vehicles were relocated to Fort Lee when Ordnance moved there. So this is part of the Ordnance collection. You ordinarily would associate tanks in the US Army and museums to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is now the home of the National Armor and Cavalry Museum and the Armor School. Problem here is that the National Armor and Cavalry Museum is still being built. So when they moved all the vehicles to Fort Benning, they didn't actually put money in to build a building. So the foundation are still taking collections on that. It is located, or will be located, right next to the National Infantry Museum, also in Fort Benning. That is the Maneuver Center of Excellence, which I always thought was a very odd name because I want to know where the Maneuver Center of Mediocrity was. And the Infantry Museum, if you're in the Columbus, Georgia area, it's actually well worth visiting just on its own. The last place that you might find some of these vehicles, if they didn't go to Fort Lee, if they didn't go to Fort Benning, then from Aberdeen they went to Anniston Army Depot, the headquarters for the Center of Military History, and that was going to be the storage facility. A lot of those vehicles then got diverted onto either Fort Benning or Fort Sill, Oklahoma, if it was an artillery piece, self-propelled gun, air defense, or what have you. So that is the current status of the American tank museum structure, at least as far as the government is concerned. Of course, there are still the private musea which are around, such as the AAF in Danville, Virginia. The Collins Foundation will be opening up in September this year. There's a large collection apparently opening up soon in Dubois, Wyoming, if you ever go that way.
Now, I do tell people if they're coming to Tankfest, my personal recommendation is to make it a Sunday-Monday deal, not Saturday-Sunday, because that way you can watch all the vehicles rolling around on the Sunday, and then the Monday you can come back and just look at the vehicles without all these crowds. Speaking of crowds, this is the line for Quickie Baby, where the Tanks had a couple of signing sessions for folks. And I always thought it was a bit of a shame that you got this huge crowd for Quickie Baby, but David Fletcher got almost nobody.
Diesel engine in the back giving it superb mobility, and now they've upped the levels of protection as well. So again, you've got a very well balanced tank there.
Small selection of German SPGs, Marder and 2 Sturmgeschützen. Now you recall that Mark III and Stug D took up defensive positions. Well, the battle was a little bit of an anticlimax, I have to say, because they didn't really do anything. They just sort of sat there and then got overrun by the British, which seems awfully unrealistic, but anyway, they kept fighting over this one bunker. It first had an Imperial German flag, then it had this sort of fake German World War II flag. That's reasonable enough, but then they fought over it with the Iraqi flag. World of Tanks sponsored the transport of this Sharby 1 from the museum in Saumur in France. It's actually the same one that I did the interior footage of in my Inside the Hatch video. Towards the end of the Tankfest days, where they were rolling around, one of the last items on the agenda was the carousel, where they simply picked a random selection of tanks. I'm not sure what the criteria were, and there's a random round in circles a few times. That IS-3 just looks so much more impressive and menacing when the thing's moving at you than it does in a museum. The Dutch, of course, got rid of all their tanks for a while, then they realized perhaps that was a bad idea and bought a few back out of storage and bought a few more with the Germans. Tankfest is one of the few times that you can actually walk around in the Vehicle Conservation Centre, which, as you can see, was also the setup shop for World of Tanks' stand. And, well, okay, it's not a lot of room, but you can actually walk around and you get a better view than you do from this viewing platform up here. You actually go up and touch some of the rare vehicles that they have.
This is Michael. Michael is the oldest surviving M4. In fact, it's the second one off the line. It was built to a British production contract. You can tell it's an old one by simply looking at the front. You've retained these fixed forward-firing machine guns. Yes, more DACA, the cult of the machine gun that the US Army was in favor of. Even though on the M3 medium which preceded it, these things were habitually deleted as useless. Other early war features, you'll see that the gunner's sight is on a periscopic housing, little rotating shield there, and it is a very narrow old-fashioned mantlet. But fundamentally, this is an early production M4A1.
Speaking of, M4s can really pick up a good clip if they wanted to, because usually they're just stuck behind something else. And when all is said and done, it's time to pack vehicles away and go home. So here's the Sharby one again, taking up a little bit of time while it reverses back out of the arena. It's actually a surprisingly nimble vehicle considering how archaic and old it is. Similarly, the British Army does not waste any time before putting its own vehicles away, although of course it doesn't have very far to travel to do so. Anyway, that brings us to a conclusion of the second video. I have an interview yet to bring out, but that's pretty much it for Tankfest 2018. I'll just finish off with a few outtakes showing some of the fun that I had trying to do some filming on my own. So, I don't know, maybe I'll get better with time, or maybe there's just so much you can do anyone, and that's it.
It gives PR folks complete conniption fits because you can't have somebody walking in front of the camera. Let's try again. So these are supposedly the best restored.
Tank rides will now cease as we get set for the arena displays.
You get used to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, it will open again at 12:20 during the...
We can do that.
I'm a big fan. Watch your videos. So.
Thank you.
You're too tall to be in tanks, aren't you?
Well, if you know how to work your way around the system, they don't check. So if I just went straight to MEPS and say I'm over the limit, well, I went through OCS and I filled out my dream sheet, and they kind of nobody checked at that point. So it worked out. All right, take care.
Thank you so much.
M16 multiple gun motor carriage. Special place in my heart. This is the only vehicle in which somebody has walked right in front of the camera. 3, 2, 1. It would have helped if I'd pressed record. Take 4, 5. Actually, let me check the sound. I forgot to press record. Again, happened to me over there as well. I'm going to have nothing left at the end of this trip. In fact, it is number 2 off the production line. It was built, of course, to a British contract. This is Michael the Sherp. It is famous for being a terrible tank, although in fairness there have been recent books that seem to indicate that perhaps the tank is not as bad as it would have been had somebody not just gone in front of the camera. 3, 2, 1.